Welcome to part 4 of the 7 Years' War. Now we're going to look at the Battle of Quebec. Now, of the battles that took place in this war, probably the most important one was the Battle of Quebec. And the reason for this is simple. Quebec is the key to Canada, right? If you control Quebec, you control the St. Lawrence River. If you control the St. Lawrence River, you can control eastern Canada. And so for the longest time, if you want to conquer Canada, you got to take Quebec, right? But that's easier said than done. When you look at the city itself, it's positioned on a portion of the St. Lawrence River where it's surrounded by high cliffs over 200 feet tall on 3 sides, right? So you can try and send your navy upstream past the city, but to do so, you've got to run through a gauntlet of the cannons in the fortified city that will shoot down on your ships on the river. The only access point is from the west, right? A large plain called the Plains of Abraham, right? And that's your only land attack route. Now, the task of taking this city is given to a very vainglorious British general by the name of Major General James Wolfe. Okay, he's only 32 years of age, and he is very flamboyant. As a matter of fact, if I recall, there's a statue of him in Quebec that has a tendency to get vandalized at least once or twice a year. You either love this guy or you hate this guy, right? So he is charged with taking the city. Inside the city, the forces are commanded by the governor of New France, the Marquis de Montcalm, right? So you have two very flamboyant figures involved in this, right? Now, Wolfe's forces are smaller than Montcalm. He has about 8,500 men, which include 10 battalions of British regular line infantry, some grenadiers, some artillery from the Royal Regiment of Artillery, and 6 companies of American Rangers, right? He's also, of course, supported by the vaunted Royal Navy. But Montcalm's forces number somewhere between 13,000 and 15,000 men. However, unlike other clashes before, these men protecting the city of Quebec are not amongst the elite, right? Here we are in 1759, right? The attrition has started to take its toll. He's got about 2,000 allied Native Americans. He's got 2,000 men that are regular garrison. He's got about 4,000 militia making up of French-Canadian trappers, really, mostly. He's even basically drafted 35 Jesuit priests into his defense, right? The regular French infantry only counts about 5,000, the total number, right? So General Wolfe is going to land in July of 1759. He's going to land on the south side of the river and begin to try and scope what he needs to do to try and take the city, right? He plans to try and take a position on the north side on July 31st, a little estuary to the east of the city. That attempt will fail, and he will have to call it back, and he reestablishes his camp there on the south side. It's there when his Royal Navy begins to push this idea of actually getting upstream. And this is where the whole battle then is going to begin to turn. So while General Wolfe is scratching his head trying to figure out how he's going to get his troops to the Plains of Abraham, his own Navy provides him with a solution. They tell him, saying, hey, look, we can run that gauntlet past the city and get you upstream from Quebec, right? We'll do it in the dead of night. We should take minimal losses if we do it. And so General Wolfe, convinced of this, will load his army onto boats, and sure enough, they'll run the gauntlet and they'll set up a new base camp on the south side of the river, upstream from Quebec, in a more direct relation to the Plains of Abraham, where he wants to get his forces. Now he has to just get them up there. And he sees a solution. There's a small causeway, an area where the slope is not as great. It's not a sheer cliff, where a little stream runs down into the St. Lawrence River. It's called Anse-au-Foulon. He decides that's the spot. We can now go downstream, because we're upstream from it. We can get our forces downstream, make a landing there in the middle of the night, and come up through that causeway and put our troops on the Plains of Abraham and finally face Quebec, right? Now, of course, there is one problem with this, and that is that the Marquis de Montcalm knows that that's a vulnerable spot, and so he does have a garrison there. However, on the night of September 12th, 1759, when General Wolfe embarks on his landing, there's a whole series of misunderstandings that happen that play right into his hands. Right now, there had been the garrison in charge of protecting Anse-du-Foulon had been told that there was going to be, on the night of the 12th of September, a series of French supply boats that were going to make a landing there at the causeway to bring supplies up to supply the city. All right, so this guy is expecting boats to land. Well, that supply shipment had gotten canceled because the British Navy is now up in that area, right, basically blocking their access to the causeway. But nobody told the commander of the forces protecting the Anse-du-Foulon, Anse-au-Foulon. So he doesn't know. So when the British ships start disembarking these soldiers in the middle in this dark night, he thinks it's the supplies. One of his officers, though, does get suspicious, and he shouts down at the men offloading on the boats. He says, "Gentlemen, identify yourself," to which one British officer, thinking quick on his feet and being fluent in French, shouted back, "Shut up, you will give away our position." And the officer did. And they quickly overwhelmed that garrison, and on the morning of September 13th, 1759, the Marquis de Montcalm awoke to see the entirety of General Wolfe's army positioned on the plains of Abraham, ready to lay siege to the city, which is probably what should have happened. But what happens next is, well, a huge mistake by the Marquis de Montcalm. He makes the decision that day that he is going to take his troops and sally forth and attack General Wolfe's forces head on, rather than let his forces remain sieged in the city and force Wolfe to take the city. Okay. So on the morning of September 13th, Montcalm personally leads his troops against General Wolfe's troops in a battle that lasts all of just 15 minutes. It's really that quick. And the British are going to suffer 658 casualties in that 15-minute pitched battle, and the French are going to suffer about the same number, right? But the victory of the British forces is decisive. They trounce the French forces and sent them fleeing back into their city. Meanwhile, both Montcalm and Wolfe are mortally wounded. Montcalm is killed, and Wolfe it is said that the last words that General Wolfe heard before he expired was, "Victory is ours," and then he died. I don't know how they know that, but okay, we'll go with that. Now, the city itself will still hold out for 5 more days, but on September 18th, 1759, Quebec will surrender, and that pretty much wraps up the 7 Years' War. You now control Quebec, which means, well, now you control Canada. In 1770, Benjamin West painted this portrait of the death of General Wolfe, right? And it's very dramatic. And so I always kind of think when I look at this is very General Wolfe. Now, in fairness, Benjamin West is known for being a little bit over the top with his paintings. Some other ones you might be familiar with is the death of Admiral Nelson, right? Or the Benjamin Franklin getting electricity off the key, things like that. That's things he's known for. But here you see General Wolfe laying there, dying very dramatically, right? He's laid over, people hunched over him, and I get a kick out of this painting, though, for one reason, because it kind of personifies the relationship that existed between the English and the French and the Native Americans in all this, right? Probably not in a way that Benjamin West probably intended, though. You have this one Native American here in the corner of the painting, looking thoughtfully at General Wolfe, and it's meant to symbolize the fact that the Native Americans were involved on both sides throughout the entire war. The French and the British both used Native American allies, but that's not what I see there. What I see there is I look at him looking at the dying General Wolfe and thinking to himself, I'm going to get me that stuff.